Salamat Pagi, Terima kasih. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Richard Unsworth. I'm an academic scientist at Swansea University in the UK and also Chief Scientific Officer of the International Marine Conservation Charity Project Seagrass. This morning I'm going to be talking about a topic recognising the necessity for Indo-Pacific seagrass conservation, a topic that Billy Waggy actually asked me to speak on, so I thought I'd follow that title, but I'm also going to give it my own twist, because that is actually the title of an academic research paper I co-authored a number of years ago, and now I'm going to put that in the context of the challenges really to achieving that conservation action that's much needed across this region. So here is the wonderful patient that we all want to think about conserving. So seagrasses, marine plants that are adapted to life in our oceans, and because they're plants, they need that high level of photosynthesis. If we do anything that interrupts that photosynthesis, then we endanger those plants. So they also need all those nutrients, just like terrestrial plants do. And just like terrestrial plants, if there's too much nutrient or not enough nutrient, those plants will struggle. And seagrasses are therefore quite susceptible to various issues. But also, life in the ocean is pretty tough. There is a lot of water movement. There's a lot of physical impacts. So seagrasses have to be really tough and adapted to keep themselves held in, sacrifice a lot of their plant material as storms come and go, and be ready to regrow and remain productive when they can. So there's a lot of challenges to life in the ocean. But the problem really is that seagrasses, wherever they live, are struggling, or have at least struggled over the long term. So a data set collated by the team in Griffith University examined the temporal change of seagrass aerial extent around the world, and these figures here clearly articulate how we've lost most of the distribution of seagrasses in most parts of the world. There is some signs of potential recovery in some places, the temperate North Atlantic, but most parts of the world we're still seeing continual decline. The tropical Indo-Pacific is one of those places, and together with a team of academic scientists from all around Indonesia, just over a decade ago I got a grouping together, and we actually examined what we knew about seagrasses and their aerial extent across the Indonesian archipelago. And all these wonderful scientists came together and gave their story of what they knew about seagrasses in their part of Indonesia. And this global story we see in this figure very much played out at a regional level throughout Indonesia. Huge levels of seagrass loss. Factors such as seaweed farming, much claimed for all its blue economy, all these silly things, is damaging seagrass and has damaged seagrass extensively around Indonesia. Oil pollution still damaging seagrass around Indonesia. Damage from fisheries, damage from plastics, damage from all sorts of coastal development, very big cause of more recent loss of seagrass throughout the area, but also water quality, multiple factors creating cumulative impacts upon seagrass. So they're not in a pretty way, and we need to think about how we stop that loss and bring about habitat recovery. The consequences of that seagrass loss aren't well recognised, but what it means is that we suddenly lose that huge three-dimensional habitat, that huge primary production that's oxygenating the water, that's creating habitat for all sorts of animals, that's cycling nutrients, that's keeping the water clean, that's filtering water that might end up on the reef, that's creating a place where people can catch animals, where fisheries can be productive, where cultural heritage can be maintained, and also where people can have recreation, whether that's for diving, snorkeling, or just recreational fishing. There are huge numbers of values that can be attributed to having a healthy and productive seagrass system, and once that's lost, you then lose those values. And it's not surprising that the global value of seagrasses ends up in the trillions of dollars. So this is a habitat we need to protect, and it's a habitat that we need to bring back and reverse the loss of locally, regionally, and globally. Reversing the loss of seagrass and trying to actually bring it back at large scale is not some simple process, and for that reason it hasn't really been achieved to date. But in some parts of the world we have seen successes. We have learnt a lot about seagrass that enable us to think about what we need to do to start making progress on those bigger goals. And a number of years ago I got together a group of leading scientists from all around the world to articulate what are the challenges to actually making those changes, to point the world on a trajectory of seagrass recovery. And what we did is articulated a whole series of global challenges for seagrass conservation, and it's those challenges that I want to go through now and leave the audience to think about as to how we can reverse the loss of seagrass in Indonesia and the wider Indo-Pacific area. So this first problem is that seagrasses are often neglected on the conservation agenda. This in many parts is their ugly duckling status relative to the more enigmatic, colourful coral reefs. They're just also an inshore, often muddy, sometimes turbid environment that no one thinks is of importance. And over time, many parts of the world have really neglected seagrasses in their conservation ambitions, and it's not a surprise that therefore they have degraded. And to better recognise what that societal role of seagrasses are, we need to think about how people might actually benefit and see the value in these habitats. And when we begin to scrape the surface of that question, we begin to find lots of examples of how seagrasses are really, really important. And for me, one of the biggest parts of that equation is the fact that as humans, many hundreds of millions of people daily consume protein that comes from a seagrass meadow, or has indirectly been enhanced by that organism spending a period of time in a seagrass meadow. So seagrasses support animal life that is consumed by people on a daily basis. Things such as shrimp, things such as urchins, sea cucumbers, small fish, but it also supports bigger productive fisheries. Sometimes those fisheries are exploited nowhere near the seagrass meadow, but they benefit from the nursery role that those seagrasses afford to those species. And so it's a huge diverse role. But in the Indo-Pacific region, what we've found as a research team at Project Seagrass, working with collaborators in Sweden, collaborators in Tanzania, collaborators in Indonesia, collaborators in Malaysia, in the Philippines, in Mozambique, is that wherever we go and there's lots of seagrass, there are always people fishing in that seagrass. And although there are many people who recreationally fish in that seagrass, what we find is that those people in society who are often the poorest are far more dependent upon the resources that seagrasses will provide. A colleague of mine, Dr. Benjamin Jones, has recently started analysing some bigger data sets that we've brought together across that region, and he's really highlighting how that dependence really rapidly increases the more poor you are when you live in proximity to seagrass. So it's almost like if there's a seagrass meadow near you and you don't have much money, you don't have many resources, then it becomes a place where you can easily collect animals. You can easily go out with limited fishing gear and bring something back that might get you either some money to buy some carbohydrates, or it might directly give you some food to eat that night. It's a critical part of the livelihoods of many millions of people around the world, and we need to better appreciate that, because when we begin to realise that there's economic, social, cultural values to these habitats and a dependence for people's livelihoods, then we begin to realise that actually we need to support these habitats. And when we scale that to much bigger processes of recognition, what we begin to realise is when we think about things such as sustainable development goals, then seagrasses have a really multifaceted role in society. Some of that is direct, sometimes it's indirect, and not every seagrass meadow has huge importance for the sustainability goals. But actually, when we look at seagrasses all around the world, somewhere there are seagrass meadows contributing to every single one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that's a really important message. And particularly in parts of the Indo-Pacific region, we find a higher association than in some other parts of the world. So protecting seagrass is about trying to think about how we're going to improve that recognition for how seagrasses support things such as the Sustainable Development Goals that governments begin to consider, that corporations begin to consider, that politicians begin to consider, and actually it's a way of better articulating that value. But to understand that the plight of seagrasses, we also need to think about their status. And that's what the second challenge is about. Although we have those pretty graphs that I showed you before, we don't have a lot of data on the world's seagrasses, and they're not monitored very well. They're not assessed. People don't often know when they're declining. We don't know where they are often, and when something we don't know it's there, we can't care about it, and if we don't care about it, we're not going to protect it. And that's why at Project Seagrass we work very closely with the Seagrass Watch team, but we've also developed our sort of entry-level citizen science program called Seagrass Spotter, where communities, individuals, divers, tourists, all sorts of people in society who are coming across seagrass can collect information about where it is. And we see this as a critical part of moving forward and trying to articulate both the value of seagrasses, but also the plight that they are suffering, because it's when people begin to realize how they're important, but also how they're struggling as a result of local, regional, global challenges, can we actually begin to take action to reverse that degradation. So that's about trying to mobilize all sorts of people, and sometimes it's divers, sometimes it's fishermen, sometimes it's snorkelers. We need to really get out there and understand how healthy seagrasses are and where it's actually distributed, because we really have huge gaps in our knowledge all around the world, and particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. The third global challenge for seagrass conservation is about identifying threatening activities at local scales to better target management action. And this is because we know there are lots of small management actions that can be taken to improve the health of seagrass, whether that's about managing fisheries activity, whether it's thinking about how people using boats are anchoring, whether it's actually managing local pollutants, particular activities from aquaculture. There are a lot of things that can be done without preventing people utilising seagrass, but through actually changing behaviour, changing practice, that means that actually seagrasses are less threatened. But unless we know what those threats are at an appropriate local level, then we can't do anything about it. And also too often it's easy to think, yeah, climate change is a big problem, can't really do much about it, or huge deforestation, we can't do much about that at local scales. But actually, when we dig into data, we begin to realize that there are lots of local scale problems that can be managed. And we've recently gone back to all the data that's been uploaded in Seagrass Spotter as a citizen science program, and in many of the observations, people have actually listed the threats that they can see and observe impacting that seagrass, and therefore for the first time we can actually look at some of these local threats to seagrass at a global level. And what we're finding is in many parts of the world, threats are cumulative. There's multiple different stresses, and many of those stresses can be managed, as I said before. And it's about digging into that data and showing that there are key things that can be learned. And what we're encouraging through this challenge is to articulate that level better. Sometimes that's about using local ecological knowledge, working with communities. Sometimes it's about scientific observation, data collection. But whatever the means of improving that knowledge, it's critical to do that at a local level, so actually actions can be taken to reverse that degradation, reduce that pressure on the seagrass. Fourth challenge is about people. And unless we recognise that people are part of the seagrass system, then we won't ever be able to manage it. You can't just exclude people from the environment and expect the environment to get better. More often than not, you either create a reaction to that exclusion, or you just move the impact to other locations. And from what we see all around the world is that wherever you have seagrass, you have people utilising that system, obtaining benefits from that system. And therefore that system is not just about the ecology, it's about a social ecological system. And whether that's people utilising clean water to swim, whether it's fishers getting a direct benefit, whether it's actually communities having coastal protection, whatever the factor is, there are many complex interacting reasons that people are part of that system. I've just been to a music festival in South Wales where the tagline is "We are nature," and I think it really defines this really, really well, because people are part of that system, and unless you recognise and begin to understand the intricate reasons that people are associated to that seagrass, will you begin to manage it. And we've recently been looking at the concept of One Health, which I think is a really nice framework to begin to appreciate how all those multifaceted values of seagrass relate to people. And actually, if you begin to manage those problems then that exist for seagrass, then you begin to actually improve the livelihoods and the different interactions of people living around that seagrass. And I think that it's important, this challenge, that people do begin to think like that, because traditionally the sort of scientific approach to environmental management excludes people, and in some places that might be necessary, and in some situations that is the way to go. But broadly, seagrasses are mostly used as a social ecological system, so to remove those people is just to move the problem. And I think that we need to learn to balance those needs of people and planet, so actually we can improve biodiversity. The fifth challenge for seagrasses globally very much relates to the audience we have today. You guys in front of me are the scientists, the researchers, thinking about what are those knowledge gaps for seagrass. And unfortunately, at a global level and at a regional level, there are huge chasms of knowledge that we don't have. Historically, seagrass has been marginalised in conservation, and therefore it's also been marginalised in science. And when I talk to a lot of funders, a lot of people doing seagrass work, there's a lot of people wanting to model seagrass systems, and they can't model those seagrass systems because we don't have the basic knowledge and the basic data sets to be able to do it. You can go to a coral reef and you can extract data that allows you to build a model, but we don't have the basic knowledge about a lot of the animals that live in seagrass. We don't have a lot of information about the ecological thresholds, the food web interactions. And when you look at the global research effort, the global funding, the conservation actions for seagrass, you find huge differences between different habitat types. And mangroves, corals have had orders of magnitude more research funding over multiple decades. They've had orders of magnitude more research effort. Funds go to coral reefs, they don't go to seagrass. And this flies in the face of the fact that actually seagrasses are much more resilient to a changing climate. We need to rethink how we fund conservation. And for all you amazing seagrass researchers out there, you need to keep up the hard work and keep grinding out more research and working to better understand these systems so we can manage them better into the future. We need to fill those gaps, fill those knowledge gaps, and keep improving our understanding of seagrass around the world. It's not just important that we generate scientific information about seagrasses, but it's critical that we also share that information, share that at local levels with communities, share it at scientific levels, at government levels. It's not just about generating the next important paper, but generating that research that can be communicated to a wider audience for wider societal benefit. And that's one of the reasons that actually we set up something called Seagrass Restorer, because we've recognised that lots of people are trying to restore seagrasses all around the world, but they're failing, and we're not sharing our successes, our failures, and seagrass restoration isn't progressing as a result. And we need more of this sort of outwelling of wishing to share our knowledge at an open level to a wide audience. And we encourage you to get involved with Seagrass Restorer and communicate your work to a local, global and scientific audience. The last challenge is perhaps the biggest, but also the most difficult to conceptualize and integrate into how we conserve seagrass. But climate change is the biggest thing that we all face, and we can't just naively put our head in the sand and think we can just conserve seagrass in the face of a changing climate. We need to think about the facets of that system that will survive, how strategies of management, species changes, all sorts of different factors need to be considered to think about how we focus our effort on conserving seagrasses into the future. And this needs more effort in a research context. It needs more legal thinking and licensing thinking. It needs to be conceptualized, but the reality is that seagrasses face an uncertain future, possibly not as badly as some parts of the natural environment, but we need to consider these factors and think about how we can maximize our resources to conserve seagrasses into the future. And finally, I think I just wanted to go back to that big gap in our knowledge of where seagrasses are around the world. At Project Seagrass, we run Seagrass Spotter, and it's an open access system for community use, for community involvement, and whether you're a scientist, a diver, a snorkeler, a bird watcher, a fisherman, you can all contribute to saving the world's seagrass by improving our global knowledge of where it is. And that's about taking photos, uploading them to our website, or just using our phone app, and contributing to that bigger knowledge base about where seagrass is and its condition and the threats that it faces. And together we can actually make a change for the better for seagrasses around the world. And I fundamentally believe that saving seagrass isn't a pipe fish dream, and it's critically important that we take the action for the world's seagrass. Thank you.